Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Gittin daf Mem Dalet. I'm really sorry that I do not have an outline for today's daf. Just got tied up. Baruch Hashem, I had a Sheva Brachos last night, and by the time I got back, I just was not up to putting together the outline. But let's get going, and hopefully I'll be able to be clear enough that you'll follow everything. So, where are we? We are discussing the sale of a slave owned by a Jewish person. So this slave is subject to various mitzvot, specifically all the mitzvot except for time-bound mitzvot, meaning effectively equivalent to the mitzvot that a woman must perform. And now what has happened is the person who owns the slave, the master, is trying to sell the slave either to a non-Jew, which will effectively undermine the slave's ability to continue to perform mitzvot, or to somebody outside the land of Israel, which might not completely undermine their ability to perform mitzvot, but will somewhat undermine. And so as a result, we've said in our Mishnah that the person must go free. We need to allow the person to go free. And the question now that the Gemara is going to be dealing with much of today is, what's the story if it's not a formal sale? Meaning, what if I don't do it voluntarily? What if somebody collects the slave for me as part of a debt, etc.? So those are the different issues that we're going to be dealing with today. And we're going to jump right in, unless you had a question. Yes.
Would the setting once free, would that have anything to do with the amount of time left in his servitude?
No. So remember, these slaves that we're talking about are permanent slaves. These are this is not talking about. So in Parshat Mishpatim, we talk about the slaves, a Jewish slave, where a Jewish person who sells himself into slavery, an Eved Ivri. Right. And in those situations, they're a slave for 6 years, and then in the 7th year, they go free. However, and then if they want to stay with their master, they can stay until the Yovel year, and they get their ear punched, and their ear pierced in a doorway, and there's a whole process for that. So that's different than this, exactly. And so. And the point is that would be somebody who's temporary. But when it comes to a slave, a non-Jewish slave who's effectively becomes partially Jewish through their slavery, so then that person would be required, is permanently a slave. So we're not talking about with any amount of years left. We're talking about the permanent, and their children are going to be slaves, etc. Indeed, you violate a positive commandment to sell the slave. And so it's a remarkable thing that we're actually effectively requiring the person you violate a positive commandment if you let your slave go free. And so it's actually quite remarkable that the rabbis are effectively saying that you can violate that positive commandment of letting your slave go free if you do something that is harmful to the slave's ability to observe Jewish law. And so that's a very interesting aspect of all of this. So Tanu Rabbanan, we're going to again ask these questions about what's the story if I don't actually do a sale, but some other transaction results in the non-Jew owning my slave. So Lava alav min ha'oved kochavim. What if I use my slave as collateral and I borrow money from a non-Jew based on that? Kevan she'asalo oved kochavim nimuso. So a Brisa says that since the non-Jew made nimuso, did his nimus, we're going to see what that is going to mean in a moment. Yatsa l'cheirus. It must be that you're going to have to allow the slave to go free. So my nimuso, what is this nimuso that we're referring to? That is going to that when the non-Jew does it, it's going to allow him to go free. So Amar Rav Yehuna bar Yehuda Nashki. That when Rav Huna bar Yehuda responded that it's Nashki. Now, what of course is Nashki? That in and of itself is a problem. So fortunately, Rashi helps us out here. And we take a look third to the last of the narrowest lines of Rashi. Chosem it's some kind of sign, the siman abdus, of an indication of, it's a seal, some kind of sign of slavery, should tolen la'avadim b'tzavarehem, that gets hung around the neck of a slave. So if, in fact, when one's borrowed money using a slave as collateral, and now the non-Jew collects that collateral, and he puts his sign, this is a my slave sign on the neck of the slave, so then that is considered a sale, and you must allow the slave to go free. And again, we're dealing with situations where it's not a formal sale, where our Mishnah explicitly says you need to let the slave go free, but other kinds of transactions that resulted in an exchange. But Mesiv Rav Sheshes says to Rav Huna, that cannot be the explanation of Nimuso. Nimuso can't be Nashki, because if Nimuso was Nashki, take a look at this Brisa, which says Ha'arisin, if you have sharecroppers. Now we're talking, and Rashi helps us out here, that we're talking about, look at the second to last of the narrow lines in Rashi on the left-hand side of the page. Ha'arisin, Yisrael, we're talking about a Jewish sharecropper, Shenaze Aris, who became a sharecropper, La'ovid Kochavim, to a non-Jew in Bekarka Ha'ovid Kochavim, with the land that the non-Jew owns. So again, the non-Jew, and we're dealing with in the land of Israel, non-Jew owns some land in the land of Israel, and this Jewish sharecropper is working that land. The Kasavar, and according to this Brisa, Yesh Kinyan La'ovid Kochavim, we're assuming that a non-Jew does have the ability to make a kinyan, take possession of the land, be'eretz, in the land of Israel. Shedlehavkia miyad ma'aser, and that will enable us to avoid the requirement of taking trumas and ma'aser. And so that is what we're assuming. V'hachachiros, and then also another kind of method of operating a well, let's take a look at the next Rashi. Actually, the Rashi helps us out here to tell us the different kinds of sharecroppers. So an aris is lamachza l'shlish l'ravia, that some percentage goes to the owner, whether it's a third, a half, a third, or a quarter. And then chachiros should couple min ha'ovid kochavim bekach v'kachit in l'shana. There, it's sort of a rental agreement. So that's the situation of chachiros. Va'arise vate avos, and arise vate avos, that is a different kind of situation. That is where, as Rashi says, va'arise vate avos, kolomer arisos kavua va'omedes me avos shahayu avosav shel Yisrael arisin bakar kazela avosav shel ovid kochavim. It's a multi-generational thing where they've served this on this land. Even then, it's not considered as if the land has become owned by a Jew. His portion is exempt from meiser. So in all of these cases, the oved kochavim shemish, and then the last case is the oved kochavim shemishkin sadeo liyisrael, back in the Gemara. So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up. First words on the line. Va'ovim kokavim shemishkein sadeo liyisrael. Or in the last of these cases, we're talking about a situation where the non-Jew has borrowed money from a Jew, and now the money is the land is serving as the collateral. And so even in that situation, and afal pisha asa nimuso, even though the Jew did nimuso. Now we were saying nimuso meant some kind of thing on the neck, some kind of symbol on the neck of ownership. But petura min hamaser, in all of these situations, he's putter from Meiser. Now, and now Rav Sheshes, having cited this brisa, explains the question. And if you want to say that nimuso means nashki, then it means this kind of symbol that you place on the neck of a slave. Sadabas nashki. Is that even possible with a field? Of course not. The fields don't have necks. Fields don't have that kind of symbol on them. There's nothing steel that you can put on a field, so that can't be what we're talking about. Ella Amar of Sheshes Zman. That when we say that we mean what nimuso is not an object that's put on something, but rather it's something that's in the document. Specifically, it's a zman, a time. As we'll understand, it means the due date. As Rashi says it, if you take a look second to last of the medium lines in Rashi, it says at the very end of the line, zman, imlo paraticha lizman ploni yehe chalut lecha. That if I don't pay back by this particular date, then this object will belong to you. That's what nimuso means. So it's a conditional transfer that is reflected in the contract. So what we're saying now with respect to the slave is if you have that conditional contract, conditional term in the contract, then it becomes yours. So kashas man as man. But now we have an apparent contradiction, because in our case of the slave, what did we say? That if there's the non-Jew has his nimus on the slave, it's as if the non-Jew owns the slave, and the Jew needs to let the slave go free. On the other hand, when it came to the field, we said the exact opposite, that even though the Jew had his nimus on the field, even though there was the time on the field that he was supposed to get it, so again, he didn't get it. And we treat it as not subject to Meiser. So that seems to be inconsistent. In one case, Nimus results in the transfer. In the other case, it does not result in the transfer. So we're going to try two different answers. Effort number one, lo kasha, hadamata zimne, hadalomata zimne. Well, one situation, we can say that we're talking about where the time has arrived. So when it comes to the slave and the non-Jew is now collecting the slave because the time has passed for your payment of the debt. So as a result, that's why he is treated as the owner. But when we're talking about the Jew who has lent money to a non-Jew who based on collateral of a field, we're talking about a situation where the date has not yet arrived. Well, in second, Elagabi Eved, Dumata Zimni Tricha Lameimar. I don't understand. If you're telling me that when the time arrives in the contract that I get to own the slave, what chiddush are you telling me here? What do you tell? Why is this in any way a surprise? You've effectively sold me your slave. So as a result, of course, it's not going to. Of course, I'm going to have to let the slave free, because of course I've effectively sold the slave to a non-Jew, and if I sell the slave to a non-Jew, I need to free him. So the second effort of the answer is to say no. Really, we're talking about both times where the date has not yet arrived. The lo kasha, halagufa, halapera. And the difference is that when it comes to the slave himself was designated as collateral. And so as a result, that's why when the debt comes due, we're going to say that that the owner needs to free the slave. But halapera, but when it comes to the situation of the field, it is not the field itself that is the collateral, it is the fruit on the field that's the collateral. And so as a result, that's why even though the time has not yet arrived, and even though I have this claim, which is an important concept and an important possessive aspect, meaning we do treat, if I hold collateral, we do treat it. Hello, Mark and Lori. We do treat it as if it's partially mine, as if I've made a kinyan in it. And so as a result, because we're only talking about the fruit of the field, that's why we're not going to say that transfers over. Okay, now we're going to give a third answer. That is a valid answer. So the question is, Mark, that we have right now is we have one brisa that says that if you lend money to somebody, exactly, and the collateral is a slave. If then if there's a specific time when the slave will get transferred to the lender, to the non-Jewish lender, then it's as if the slave has already been transferred, and it's as if the slave has been sold by a Jew to a non-Jew, and the Jewish owner needs to let the slave go free. But when it came to a field, same situation, but reverse. So now the lender is the Jew, and the borrower is the non-Jew, and the field is the collateral. We say that even though the Jew has this right to collect from the field, we said that the field is not subject to trumos and maestros, which is something that is only true assuming that it's still owned by the non-Jew. So in one case, the use of collateral creates a transfer, and in the other case, the use of collateral does not. So now we have a third answer to explain how these two brises can be aligned. So the bias ema bishalava almanas lemashkano, that in the situation where in both brises are talking about where the person borrowed in order to collect, the loan mishkano, but he did not yet collect. So in both situations, we're talking about where effectively the time has already arrived. I'm able to collect, and what the answer is that when it comes to the slave, the fact that he could be taken, that's enough to be considered as if he's sold. But when it comes to the field, that's not enough. And so that's the situation. Okay, and so those are the two valid answers and the one answer that we tried and was not successful with respect to explaining these two situations. Now, again, we're going to continue to try and discuss, if you sell a slave to a non-Jew, then you definitely have to free that slave. But what if it's not an ordinary sale? So we talked about the collection of a loan. Now we're going to deal with another situation.
A loan?
So we talked about a situation where it was a collateral of a loan. And so now we're going to deal with a regular loan, no special connection to the slave, meaning I borrowed money from Chris the non-Jew, and Chris now comes to collect and he takes my slave. What's the story in that situation? So Tana Rabbanan, Givo Bechovo, if a non-Jew collects the slave as part of a collection action because he's owed money, Oshalakacho Sikrinkun, or he takes the slave as part of extortion, if we take a look at Rashi, Sikrikun, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in the narrow lines on Mem Daled Amud Aleph, Bishashi Yisrael Mufkarin Lahariga. If at the time the Jew is being held and is subject to the threat of death, and he says, listen, I've got a very valuable slave that I can give you. Let me give you this slave, and that way you won't kill me. What?
That's killing.
Well, because sometimes people want to take somebody's things, and the easiest way to take somebody's things is to kill them, unfortunately. So it's not a no, it's the very bad thing to do. And that's what we're saying, exactly. So the point is that in this situation, so lo yatzil cheres, in that situation where it's being taken effectively against the Jew's will, so then that will not go free. So very important distinction. If I make my slave collateral for that loan that I borrow money from Chris, then it's as if I sold him. But if I don't make my slave collateral and and Chris just comes and collects him as part of his enforcement action, well, then I haven't really sold him and I don't need to free him. Okay. Uvachova lo. Now, 1 second. are you telling me that in this case where I just said that the loan is that Chris claims the slave as a result of a loan, I don't have to set him free? Uraminhu, we seem to have a contradictory brisa that says the following: Haresha ansu beis hamelech gorno. If the house of the king comes and forcibly takes a granary, a goren, that's where you store the grain. If in fact it was an effort to collect a debt, but that the king was owed, well, then you still have to be subject meiser to the produce of the granary. Because even though the granary now belongs to the non-Jew, and you might think that it doesn't have to have a meiser, no, it does. V'im ba'an paros pater milaser. However, if it's this other kind of situation, if it's a loss on the guy, meaning if the king is taking more than he's entitled to, well, then you don't have to separate meiser. So how do you explain these two things? In one case, it seems like a debt collection is still subject to meiser, is like a sale, and whereas in the other situation, it's not. Shiny husam to kamish tarshe. No, in the situation, he would have benefited from the collection of the debt, because look, if the non-Jew collects the grain from my granary before I've separated meiser, then effectively that fact will benefit me, because he's taken $100 of grain for his $100 loan, but I'm only supposed to get, $88 of that grain, because $2 of that dollars of that grain are supposed to go to the Kohen, $10 of that grain are supposed to go to the Levi, and I'm supposed to get the 88, and maybe even some of the 88 I need to either give as Meiser Sheni or I need to give as Meiser Ani. Bottom line is that I'm going to save some money, and so as a result, that's why the granary case is different. Okay, so next case. So Tashma to Amar Rav Hamocher Abdul Lefarhang Oved Kochavim Yatza Lecherus. Now, what is this farhang? So let's take a look at Rashi. It's the about 15 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Meitzik Bisam Alilot. This is somebody who's an oppressor. He's a mean guy, and he makes false charges. Umachrolo, and the Jew sells him his slave bidemei an pruto, as the money of the blackmail shahalil alav, as that is being threatened to him through these false charges. So now that's what we're talking about. So again, if one sells the slave to a blackmailer, yatzel cheres, he's going to go free. Well, now in second, doesn't that also suggest that even the situation of an extortionist who takes the slave should go free? So no, hasam have a lay lefayes. Well, there you had other assets that you could have used to assuage and to convince the blackmailer not to blackmail you. But below fies, you chose the slave. Meaning, the question is, in these various debt situations, is how was the slave chosen? If the slave was chosen by you, the Jewish owner, in order to get out of the debt, whether it's as collateral or as a method of paying off the blackmailer, those situations, the guy goes free. Exactly. But if it's being forced upon you and you're not being involved in the selection of the slave, then you're in trouble, because the people are being mean to you. But you won't have to free the slave. So Gufa. So now we're going to take a look at this statement below. All right, Gufa. So Amar Rav Hamocher Abdul Farhang Ovid Kochavim Yatzel Lecheres. So we're going to take a look at this statement again. My Havale Ma'evad. What was he supposed to do? Meaning, you said that he was supposed to appease him some other way. So Havale Lefayes below Pies. So again, just to clarify, it's the Gemara sort of repeats it in the other direction, that he was supposed to satisfy the blackmailer with other property, but he didn't do so. And so that is why we're going to treat this as a voluntary situation.
Report him to the authorities.
Well, the problem is when he's the authority, that's when you're really into trouble.
A police officer?
Yeah, if in today's world, thank God we have good police officers that will protect us and not allow this to happen. And the courts will not allow this to happen. But in those days, it was a different story. You didn't have good courts. You didn't have people that you could trust to protect you. All right. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, machro l'shloshim yom mahu. What if you sell the slave for 30 days? Is that considered a sale or not? Again, all this is about what if you don't actually sell it completely. So Tashma, Da'amar Rav HaMoker Abdullah Farhang Ovid Kochavim Yatzel L'Cheres. Now, what's the story with you? If you, we said that when it comes to the blackmailer, you need to let the slave go free. And at the moment, Rashi explains that the Farhang Ovid Kochavim, the kasalka daitach avod avodas hamelech adzman ploni v'lashuv, that the expectation at the moment is that when you sell the slave to the blackmailer, it's in order to work for the king. That's why the blackmailer has the ability to force it, and it's only for a certain amount of time, and then he's going to go back. So as a result, isn't that a situation just like the sale of 30 days? And the answer, of course, is not. No. No, we could say that situation that Rob was talking about was where the slave never is expected to come back. So makro chutz mimalach tomahu. So we don't have an answer. And now, what about if you sell him without giving him the right to do any work? Meaning, as Rashi says, the next Rashi, gufa kanoi lach ubilvan shelo tishtabed bo, that I'm going to allow you, Chris, to buy my slave, but you're not allowed to use him to work. You can use him to parent new slaves. Okay. And so as a result, but why does that matter? Because by not working him, he can still perform mitzvot. Shalom machro el lahasio l'shivcha. So he only sold him in order to marry a slave woman, Lil Vladot, in order to have children. Dahashdo lo mifka mitzvos. He's not being forced to prevent himself from doing mitzvos. L'chalal Shabbatot, to violate Shabbos. Inami, as we'll see in a moment, machro l'malachto chutz mishabbatot v'yamim tovim mahu. All right, so let's take a look and see what the next one is. Or chutz min hamitzvos mahu. Or if I sell the slave and tell you that you're not allowed to have him violate any mitzvot. Or chutz mishabbatot v'yamim tovim mahu. Or if I sell him and I say he's not allowed to work on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Oh, leger letoshav liyisrael mumar mahu. Or what if I sell him to somebody who is a ger toshav? A ger toshav, the simple understanding is that that's somebody who observes the 7 mitzvos, the 7 Noahide mitzvot. And so as a result, what about that person? Or what if I sell him to a Jew who is not observant, who denies the existence of God? So that maybe he's like a non-Jew. O lakuti mahu, or if I sell him to a kuti, again, a Jew whose conversion is questionable. So pasha meha chada. So 1 second, let's at least answer one of them. Ger toshav harehu ka'ovid kochavim. A ger toshav is just like a non-Jew. Kuti the Yisrael mumar. Amri la ka'ovid kochavim, but Amri la Yisrael. Some people say he's like a Jew. Some people say it's not. Bo'emine Rabbi Ami. So they asked about Rabbi Ami again. So, but the bottom line is that we did not answer most of these questions. We don't have a definitive response. So they asked Rabbi Ami, if a slave gives himself up to these bandits, the Ein Rabo Yochel Otzio, and the master's unable to get him back.
Wow.
Okay. So again, the slave was captured, and now I want to try and get him back as my slave, but I can't do it. Lo b'dinei Yisrael, lo b'dinei Oved Kochavim, because these bandits are sort of like their own local government. You can imagine in some of these third world countries where the bandits have as much say about the law as the formal government. So there's no ability to enforce anything and get the money, get the back. But what if the bandits say, listen, we think your slave is terrific. we want to buy him from you. You're not going to get him back. And so you have two choices. You can accept the amount that we're going to pay you, or you can get nothing.
It's not good.
No, nothing's not good at all. And so what's the story there? Do we say that because I'm accepting the money, it's as if I got paid and sold him? Or do we say, no, I didn't even have a choice about any of this. Yes, they gave me some money, but I didn't have any choice. So Amrle Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zarika, Puk Ayin B'milchaltech. Go take a look what you remember from the your efforts. So he thought about it and came up with the following. If you sell your house to a non-Jew, dumav asurin, the money that you received for that house that you sold to a non-Jew in the land of Israel is prohibited. You're not allowed to benefit from it. However, if a non-Jew takes away a Jew's house, and the Jew is not able to take it back, not in the Jewish court, not in the non-Jewish court, you're allowed to take the money as a payment, and the Jew can even write a sale deed in that situation that will be enforceable in the courts of non-Jews, because the Jew is and he can even, yes, because it's like rescuing the money from their hands. Meaning, again, the point is that either you get something or you get nothing. And if the question is, do I get something or nothing, and I take the something, that's not a sale, because I wasn't going, the alternative is not getting anything. All right, below bias. Well, one second, maybe it's just a house is different, and we can't necessarily bring a proof that this would also be the rule with respect to a slave, because you only have one house, lo asi lizbune, and you're not going to sell a house to anybody else because you need a house to live in. Aval avda, but when it comes to a slave, the sagile below avda, you could get along without a slave. Asi lizbune. Maybe we're worried that if we allow you to accept the money, you might then come to sell a slave, olo or not. So which one is it? So Shalach lahu Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami said back the following response: Mini Amar, Mini Ami Bar Nasan. From me, Ami Bar Nasan says the following: Torah Yotza l'chol Yisrael. The instruction should go out to all of Israel. So that if a slave gives himself up to bandits, and the person can't take him back, doesn't make a difference whether it's the Jewish or the non-Jewish courts. You're allowed to take the money. And you can even write the deed, because you're like at least taking money away from the non-Jews. So the bottom line is that, again, in all of the cases where you don't decide whether or not the slave is involved in the transaction, it seems as if you do not need to write a get shechrur. But if the emancipation document, but if you were involved in the selection of the slave as part of the transaction, then you would. So Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Hamocher Abdullah Obi Kochavim, Konsinoso Admeya Bidamav. That when it comes to somebody who sells a slave to a non-Jew, we are going to punish him up to 100 times the slave's value. Now the question is, Dafka. No, what we're going to say is that you need to go back to the buyer, and you need to tell him, I need to buy him back. Not only do I need to buy him back, but once I buy him back, I have to free him. So this is a real punishment against me for selling him. So the question now that we are asking is dafka o lav dafka. When you said 100 times, do you mean literally 100 times? Meaning I just sold him for $1,000. Do I need to actually pay the buyer up to $100,000 in order to do it? Or are you just exaggerating and saying that I need to pay a lot? So Tashma, come in here. If you sell a large animal to a non-Jew, we are going to cause you to buy it back for 10 times the amount. again, because we are concerned, this is, because this might, the concern that we have is that this might result in the violation of Shabbos. Because what will happen, the non-Jew will come to you on Shabbos and say, listen, you sold me this animal. I need this animal to work, but he's not doing anything for me. He's not working. And so you'll give him instructions or to call the animal, and it will end up resulting in the animal doing work. And you may end up helping the animal work on Shabbos when you're not supposed to. So we're going to say no selling of big animals to non-Jews. The Dilma shiny ebed the kol yoma v'yoma mafgalei mitzvos. Well, 1 second, maybe we would require more for a slave because each and every day is worth much more, because every day is a day that the slave can't perform mitzvahs. Now, there's another whole view of what we just went over, another whole perspective on this particular case. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Hamocher Avdullah Ovikochav Konsin Oto Ad Asara Bedamav. So it's 10 times that you're going to force him to pay back. So again, Dako Lav Dako. Is that a specific number or a non-specific number? Well, Tashma Damre Shalkakar Amocha Brahema Gazalo would become Kotsano so add Meya Vidameha. Oh, now again, the exact opposite situation. When you sell that large animal to a non-Jew, you have to pay back 100 times. So again, does that indicate that really 100 times is the right number? So shiny Eved, Delo Haderlay. No, the slave maybe is different, because when you buy back the slave, he doesn't go back to being your slave. He goes free. Ela behema taimamai. Why are we concerned about the extra money for the animal? Mishum de hadrale lekanse tfeichad. So because the animal goes back to his position after he buys it back, so we're going to penalize him, and another time, we'll penalize him a double, a squared amount in order to do it. Ella Eved Milsa Delo Shchicha. I'm sorry. And so the question is the following. So I apologize. So let's go through again. This is Ella Behema Taimamai. Why is it that we're going to penalize the person who sold the animal to the non-Jew so much that it's 100 times? Mishum dehadrale, because he's going to get it back. Well, liknasei tfeichad. Let him just pay 11 times. Meaning, the point is that if the point is that we want to cause him to suffer the loss that's associated with him, so just allow him to pay an additional one time over, and that will be effectively like he never gets it back. So that can't be. It doesn't make sense to have it be 10 more times the amount that we're going to require him to pay. Ella Eved Milsa Delo Shchicha. Rather, a slave is something that's uncommon. Milsa Delo Shchicha Lo Gazri Brava Rabbanan. So the rabbis didn't really make a decree about the slave situation, because that is not something that's common. And really, the right amount is the 100 times, and the 10 times is just because we're saying that you have to pay more, but we didn't actually set aside any particular value associated with it. Okay, so now a next question, again, all dealing with the sale of a slave, not in an ordinary course. And now we ask, by Mine Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Asi, Machar Abdo Umes. What happens if the person who sold the slave to the non-Jew dies? Do his children have to go and try and collect back? Do we say that his son has to go and buy back the slave? So im tim selomer seram ozim bechor umes kanso bno acharab. So we have a principle that, let's back up before we say, I translate these words to know what we're going to be having. There is a rule that when I give my firstborn animal to a Kohen, if the animal has no blemish, then it has to be offered as a sacrifice. But if in fact it has a blemish, so then it's you can just eat it. You don't have to do any kind of sacrifice. So the concern was that the Kohanim would create blemishes on these animals that they got, because that way they get the whole animal and they don't have to give any of it to Hashem, and they don't have to go through the trouble of offering it as a sacrifice. And so therefore there was a fine, a knas put on them if that in fact happened. So if we have Tserem Ozen Bechor Umes, now what happens if a Kohen nicked the ear of a firstborn animal and now the Kohen dies? Hansu beno acharav. So there, one possibility is that we are going to punish and have a penalty on the son, and not allow him to enjoy the animal either. Mishum de isura doraisahi, because the causing of the blemish is a violation of a Torah prohibition. Aval hacha isura derabanan. But here, this is only a rabbinic prohibition. So as a result, maybe we would not punish him. And now we can turn to Mem Daled Amabet. The imtim zilomar kaven malachto b'moed umeis. Or maybe if you have somebody who is supposed to work who sets aside time to work on Chol HaMoed, and we say lo kansu b'nei acharav, and now that situation, we're going to take away whatever benefit he's supposed to get, but we don't punish that person's son. So we have two different situations. One situation where we punish the son, one situation where we don't punish the son. And the question is which one are we going to analogize to our case of selling the slave, and then the seller dies, and now does the son have to buy it back? So lo kansu
Question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So mishum delo avet isura. Why is it that in that situation the person who scheduled work to do on Yontif and then died before he did the work? So as a result, because ordinarily we would punish him and say that he's not allowed to do the work. So why are we going to allow the son to do the work? Because he hadn't yet done. The father didn't do the violation, didn't do the prohibition until before he died. So hachamai, but again, here the prohibition actually was done by the father. So l'didei kansu rabbanan, do we say that we punish only him? V'ha leisei, and he's no longer alive. Odilma limamone kansu rabbanan, or are we punishing the guy's money? V'ha isei, and now this money is now in the hands of the son, and so as a result, we're going to punish the son. So Amrle Tanisua, we have the answer in a Mishnah in Shviyas Parak Daled Mishnah Bet. Studish is Kapsa B'Shviyas. If you have a field that was cleared of thorns during Shemitah year, during the 7th year, Tizra Lemotze Shviyas. It can be planted even after Shviyas. However, Nitaiva or Nidaira, if in fact it was fertilized by the animals that were in it, or that either directly or that was you allowed your animals to stay in it, and so that way it was fertilized indirectly. Lo tizra lemotze shviyas, then you're not allowed to. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina naktinan. We have a tradition that heitiva umes, that if somebody fertilized the field and then died, b'no zara, then the son is allowed to do the planting. Alma l'didei kansu rabbanan, livrei lo kansu rabbanan. So we see that the rabbis penalize only the person, not the assets. And so as a result, the son is not going to be punished. Amar Rabaye, naktinan time taharos shel chavero umes. Well, 1 second, we have another ruling. If in fact I made something tameh for that belonged to somebody else, and then God forbid I were to die, lo kansu rabbanan b'no acharav. So the rabbis don't punish the person's sons afterwards. So as a result, again, my time, what's the reason? Hezek she'enu nikar lo shmei hezek. It's because some kind of damage that is not a visible damage is not a biblical damage from a biblical perspective. And what is it? But because you did in fact harm the person, ukansa the rabbananhi. The fact that we have liability for that situation is a rabbinic liability. Oladide kansu rabbanan vilbre lo kansu rabbanan. So it was only the person himself that is punished and not the slave. Okay, so that all dealt with the situation of when is a sale and when is a sale not a sale. And now we go to the last part of our Mishnah, which referenced to chutz la'aretz. We said that if you try to sell the slave outside of Israel to somebody who's going to be a master outside of Israel, even if that other new master is Jewish, so he will continue to observe mitzvot, but he won't have all of the mitzvot that he would have in the land of Israel. So what's the story? So Tana Rabbanan, we have a brisa. Hamocher avdel chutz la'aretz. If you sell your slave to outside the land, yatzal cheres, he has to go free. V'tzarich get shekra, and he needs a document to confirm his emancipation. Mirabo sheni, from the second master, meaning the purchaser. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Pamim yatsa upamim lo yatsa. Sometimes he does go out, sometimes he does not go out. So Ketzad, how is it that he would not go out? Amar ploni avdi mecharti hula ploni antuchi. If I sell my slave to somebody and I say that I'm selling my slave to John Doe from Antioch. So what's the story? Lo yatsa. In that situation, he does not necessarily go out to freedom because I only told you where John Doe was from. I didn't tell you that John Doe still lives there.
Wow.
But if I tell you that it's John Doe from Antioch who lives in Antioch, then yatsa, then he would go out for freedom. Because again, now it's clear that I'm making the sale outside the land of Israel. V'hatanya mechartiu la'antuchi yatsa. Well, 1 second. What about the fact that we have another brisa that specifically says that if I sold it to somebody who is from Antioch, then he goes out. The slave goes out. Lantuchi hasharui belud lo yatsa. But if I were to say the Antuchi, John Doe, who's from Antioch, but he lives in Lud, which is in the land of Eretz Yisrael, and indeed that's where the airport is, Lo Yatsa, then he
Many miles.
how many miles from where? From Antioch? I don't know how many miles from Antioch Lud is, but maybe
Never heard of.
you never heard of Antioch before? I never heard of Antioch as a place either. Maybe I'll do some research and see what I can find about it.
I never heard of.
Yeah. Okay. So
that.
So we have,
I've heard of it, but I can't tell you much.
I think it might be in Turkey, but I'm not 100% sure. But okay, but we'll figure it out, and God willing, I'll be able to share that tomorrow. So the point is what's the story here? We have one brisa that says that if I sell this to somebody from outside the land of Israel, that in alone is enough to be like I sold the slave outside of Israel. But if on the other hand, if I say that I'm selling the slave to somebody who's from outside the land of Israel, the other brisa said it's not like I sold it to somebody outside the land of Israel. Oh, it's only if I say that the person lived outside of Israel, then it's as if I sold him outside of Israel. So we have two contradictory brisas. So lo kasha, ha de isle besa be'eretz Yisrael, ha del isle ushpiza be'eretz Yisrael. No, one place is where if Antioch has a true home in the land of Israel, well, then if I sell it to Antioch, it doesn't mean that necessarily the slave is leaving Israel. But if, on the other hand, I don't say that I'm selling it, I sell it to Antioch, I sell it to John Doe from Antioch, and all John Doe has in the land of Israel is a hotel room and just a temporary location, well, then everybody knows that he's going to take the slave back to Antioch. And so as a result, that's why it's going to be considered as if it's a real slave. It's as a real sale outside the land of Israel, and he will go free. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, Ben Bavel Shenasa Isha Be'eretz Yisrael. If somebody from Bavel, outside of the land of Israel, comes and marries a Jewish girl from Israel, And now the hichnisalo avadim ushvachos, and she brings into the marriage these various slaves. The daito lachzor, and he intends to bring her back into Bavel. He's going to take her home with her because they met. So Mahu, what's the story? Is that a sale outside of the land of Israel? Or is that a sale inside the land of Israel? And then the guy brings the slave outside of Israel. So Tiboy Lemanda Amar Hadin Ima, that now there is a rule that there's a rule that we saw in Maseches Yevamos that dealt with the question of what rights does a woman have in when she leaves the marriage to the original property that she brought into the marriage.
She's entitled to it.
So the question is sometimes she's entitled to the value, and sometimes she's entitled to the actual objects. And that was a machlokes that we saw, that some people say that she's actually can get back the objects themselves, and some people say that no, she's only entitled to the original value. That in situations where the husband has only guaranteed the value, so it's as
he's entitled to the vineyard.
well. The question is if in fact the question is how has she brought this object into the marriage? If she brings the object into a marriage and he takes a guarantee, he gives her a guarantee that he will not lower the value of that object, then it's almost as if he bought the object and she's only entitled to the money. And if in fact, however, he's going to just get the fruit of it, but it really always belongs to her, then the value, if it goes up or down, goes with her, and she's going to get the land back. But the question is even in that first situation, if she asks for it back, do we say that she has some connection to it and therefore we're going to let her take it? Or do we say, no, she doesn't have really, and it's tough luck. She's effectively sold it to her husband and all she gets is the money. So the point is that Tiboy Lamanda Amar Hadinima, that even if we say that when she asks for her objects back, we give it to her. Tiboy, it's a question. Tiboy Lamanda Amar Hadinimo, and it's a question even if we say that the man does not have to return the objects themselves. How do I understand that? Tiboy Lamanda Amar Hadinima, that if she gets her stuff back, Kaven de Hadinima, Kidida Damu, is when, since it's as if the law is that she gets her things back, does that mean that it's like that it's like it continues to be her property? Odilma Kevin de Mishabde lay lepera, but or do we say that since the man gets the benefit of it while they're married, Kidide Damu, that it's as if it's his property? V'tiboy lamanda amar hadeni mo. And similarly, it's a question, even according to those who say that the man can just give her the money. Do we say that since it's as if it's his property, it's like it's his property? Or do we say that since he has not acquired it itself, meaning that we treat it as if she still has some claim to it, or do we say that no, look, she still has a right to claim it? So as a result, what's the story? Teku. So okay, we don't have an answer. So in this situation, it's unclear whether or not the owner needs to free his slave. So, but underlying this is the question of what happens if somebody decides to move from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel with his slave. Well, for that, God willing, you'll need to wait to tomorrow's daf, and we'll discuss it. God willing,
We want to ask you
tomorrow.
something, David.